Miyamoto Musashi fought over 60 duels in his lifetime and never lost a single one, including his famous fight against Sasaki Kojiro on Ganryu Island. Late in his life, around 1643, he sat alone in a cave called Rigando and wrote down everything he'd learned about mastery in a book called the Book of Five Rings. He wasn't writing about money. He was writing about strategy for swordsmen. But the principles inside that cave apply directly to why smart people stay broke. If you've ever felt like you understand more than the people around you, but somehow still aren't getting ahead financially, this is exactly the problem Musashi described 400 years ago. In the next few minutes, you'll see the specific ideas from his 5 books: Earth, Water, Fire, Wind, and Void, and how each one exposes a different way intelligent people sabotage their own progress. Musashi divided his teaching into 5 sections named after the classical elements, and each one targets a different kind of failure. The first problem he identifies isn't a lack of intelligence. It's the gap between knowing a technique and actually mastering it. He warns specifically against practitioners who accumulate knowledge and skill without ever developing real understanding underneath it. Translators often describe this as the difference between sen, meaning surface technique, and true strategic wisdom that only comes from lived experience. Think about how many people can explain compound interest, budgeting, or investing perfectly, yet still make the exact same financial mistakes every single year. That's sen without wisdom. Information sitting in your head that never actually changes your behavior when it matters. Musashi's answer wasn't to learn more facts. It was to study the way broadly, understanding timing, psychology, and multiple disciplines at once, not just narrow technique. Applied to money, that means understanding not just how to save, but the psychology of why you spend, the timing of opportunity, and how other people's decisions affect yours. Someone who only memorizes financial rules without understanding themselves will keep breaking those rules under pressure, the same way a swordsman who only memorizes forms freezes in a real fight. The second failure Musashi targets appears in his Wind chapter, where he directly criticizes other sword schools for over-specializing. He accused rival schools of narrowing their focus so much that they lost sight of practical, adaptable strategy in favor of rigid, showy technique. That's a direct warning against exactly what smart but broke people do constantly: going deep into one narrow skill while ignoring how the wider world actually moves. Someone might be brilliant at their job, technically excellent, highly credentialed, and still financially stuck, because expertise in one narrow lane never taught them adaptability. Musashi's fighters who specialized too narrowly could win in the dojo and still lose in the real world, where opponents don't follow the rules they trained for. The financial version of that is obvious once you see it. Someone optimized for a single skill set, blindsided the moment their industry or income source shifts underneath them. Adaptability, not narrow mastery, is what let Musashi survive over 60 real duels against opponents who each fought differently. The third idea comes from his Void chapter, the final and most abstract of the 5 books, where he emphasizes acting from direct, unclouded perception rather than rigid theory. In practice, that means not letting preconceptions, assumptions, or inherited beliefs about money dictate decisions that should be based on what's actually happening right now. Someone who assumes they already understand a financial situation, a market, or an opportunity without actually looking clearly at it is fighting with a clouded mind. Musashi trained himself to see what was actually in front of him, not what he expected or feared to see, and that clarity is what separated him from opponents who lost to their own assumptions. Financially, that clouded perception looks like clinging to outdated advice, refusing to update a plan, or assuming a past strategy will keep working forever without checking if conditions changed. Here's the important honesty check before we go further. Musashi never wrote a single word about wealth, savings, or money directly. He wrote the Book of Five Rings, specifically as a martial strategy text for swordsmen and military commanders in 17th century Japan. So any wealth lesson pulled from his work is a modern interpretation, applying his principles of mastery, adaptability, and clear perception to a completely different arena than the one he intended. That doesn't make the lesson less valuable. It just means we should be honest about what he actually taught versus what we're extending his ideas to cover. The value isn't in pretending Musashi was secretly a financial guru. It's in recognizing that the psychology of mastery he described works the same whether you're holding a sword or a spreadsheet. So how do these 3 ideas, sen versus wisdom, over-specialization, and clouded perception, actually change how someone approaches building wealth. Start with the first one, the gap between knowledge and wisdom, and be honest with yourself about which side of that gap you're actually standing on. If you can explain a financial concept perfectly, but your bank account doesn't reflect that understanding, the problem isn't more information, it's applied experience. Musashi didn't become undefeated by reading about swordsmanship. He became undefeated by fighting real opponents in real conditions and adjusting after every single encounter. That means the fastest way to close your own gap is smaller, real decisions made consistently, not more theory absorbed passively. Second, look honestly at how narrow your current skill set actually is, and whether you've quietly built your entire financial identity around one single lane. Musashi criticized swordsmen who mastered one narrow style so completely that they became helpless outside of it. And that exact pattern shows up in careers and income streams constantly. Adaptability doesn't mean abandoning your expertise. It means making sure you understand enough beyond it that a single shift in your industry doesn't leave you completely exposed. Third, actively check your assumptions against what's currently true, instead of running old beliefs about money on autopilot. That could be an outdated belief about what a safe investment looks like, an old assumption about job security, or a plan built for conditions that no longer exist. Musashi's Void chapter isn't mystical nonsense. It's a practical instruction to keep observing clearly instead of operating on assumptions you stopped questioning years ago. None of these three shifts require more intelligence than you already have. That's the entire point of using Musashi's framework here. He wasn't undefeated because he was smarter than every other swordsman in Japan. He was undefeated because he kept converting knowledge into adaptable, clear-eyed action. That's the exact distinction between people who are smart but stuck, and people who are smart and actually moving forward. It's not a talent gap, it's a translation gap between what you know and what you actually do with that knowledge under real pressure. Musashi spent his final months alone in a cave writing down exactly this lesson, because he'd watched skilled swordsmen lose for the same reasons over and over. He wasn't writing a manual for winning duels anymore at that point. He was writing a manual for why capable people keep failing despite their capability. That's the version of this lesson worth actually sitting with, not ancient samurai secrets, but a very specific, very testable explanation for a very modern problem. Smart but broke usually isn't a mystery once you look at it through this lens. It's Zen without wisdom, narrow mastery without adaptability, and old assumptions running unchecked. Fix those three things, and you're not applying some ancient mystical secret. You're applying the exact same principles that kept one man undefeated for his entire life. The Book of Five Rings has survived for almost 400 years because the psychology in it never actually went out of date. Swords changed, industries changed, entire economies changed, but the gap between knowing something and actually mastering it never closed on its own for anyone. That's why this text still gets read by strategists, athletes, and business people today, not because it predicted modern finance, but because human self-sabotage hasn't changed much at all. If you recognized yourself in even one of these three patterns while watching this, that's not a bad sign. That's the starting point Musashi himself worked from. He didn't start undefeated either. He started by losing, studying, and adjusting until the gap between knowledge and action closed completely. There's another video on this channel that breaks down a completely different historical mindset shift, one used by people who turned very little into a great deal. If this framework made sense to you, that video takes the same honest, no-hype approach and applies it to a totally different kind of story. Watch that one next, because the pattern connecting both of these lessons is bigger than either topic on its own. Go check it out now, because understanding one mindset shift always makes the next one click into place faster.